David, we've got a slightly early show today, starting, ironically, slightly late by a minute. We're just about ready to get underway. How are you this morning, David?
I'm very well, Jason. That was a nice segue.
Exactly. It's, you know, we've got multiple simultaneous things changing here, and everybody loves to update their software, and I tell you, David, it's not easy, making it look easy, and I don't understand where we've moved our full screen. There it is, I've found it. Okay, so we've got you with us now, David, and we're ready to begin. David, we've got an amazing guest joining us later today when we begin our Discovery CSI. Strangely, you're in a 4x3 format, so there's things for me to continue to evaluate here. It's amazing, David. How are you today?
I'm very well, Jason. It's going to be an interesting show. We're talking about a whole, right?
Right, exactly. Thank you for bringing me back to that. We're going to be talking about something that you've just brought to my attention. This is so frequently the way these things go. You've got an alarming discovery that you're well aware of. I have no idea about it, and then you send it to me and you say, well, of course, I was aware of that. So tell us what we're looking at here, David.
Well, you're looking at an aerial view, essentially, of the debris field at Ground Zero, where obviously there's a great hole in a building there. That's building number 6, which is the Customs Service building, which has an interesting past, and obviously it had an interesting future on 911. To the left of it is the debris part associated with Towers 1 and 2, the North Tower and the South Tower. And to the right, that debris field there is building number 7, the famous building which Jane Stanley with the BBC announced had fallen. She called it the Salomon Brothers building.
Yeah.
And she announced it had fallen or collapsed about, I think, 25 minutes before it actually did. So there was some very interesting technologies at play that I want to talk about. Now, the title of the show that you've given today is...
what they took from Starnet.
Yes, what they took from Starnet. So at first blush, people might be a little puzzled by that. So I better remind people about Starnet Communications, right?
Yes.
Okay, so on August the 20th of 1999, what proved to be, or what over the previous 4 years had become to be, was an elite criminal enterprise called Starnet Communications. And I believe Starnet Communications was hosted by the Vancouver City government, the province of British Columbia, and the Canadian government. And very interestingly, it had become a major global supplier, creator and supplier of hardcore adult and child pornography and online gaming services into 60 countries. Now, for me, I would say that's more powerful than any mafia family or the Hells Angels or whatever, because what you've got here, as you see, the Starnet's paper value neared $900 million, so it hit nearly $1 billion.
It's astounding.
It had been 4 years in business. And I would say that by the time of the raid, it had potentially nearly 1 million blackmail victims. Now, it obviously had a number of physical victims who had been invited into the studios of Starnet at 425 Carroll Street, where you and I visited briefly, not the studios, but we were outside. And what I think was happening is a wealthy or influential or high-flying type individual could fly into Vancouver and check in overnight to a 4-star or 5-star hotel and call Starnet and ask for whatever victim they needed to turn their sexual cranks, which is a rather obscure phrase, but what I'm getting at, let me give you an extreme example. Let's say someone is entertained by watching or participating in a late-term abortion. as you and I have called the downtown east side, we called it a victim farm.
You've coined
because the
that term,
degradation.
yeah.
Sorry?
You've coined
Yeah, I
that
think we
term,
might
and
have
it was
coined
quite
it.
an interesting observation.
Yeah, it's because where there's a level of degradation of the community that is well above just the simple poverty of a ghetto. You know, I've seen the slums of Lagos and Calcutta and places around the world during my travels. But in the downtown inside, it's quite unique because there's a sense of menace and failure and horror in the air. And I felt that when I first visited that, in maybe 1992, soon after I arrived in BC. And you and I have a picture outside the mural up on the wall with the raven and
I
the
was going to
star.
actually bring up our video from when we went there. And I agree with you, David. It was, I mean, look, I'm from New York, which many people around the world consider one of the toughest cities around. And I can tell you that the people who we encountered in the downtown east side in Vancouver were very aggressive, much more so than homeless people in New York.
Yes, and I think, and it's got obviously problems, murders, suicides, drugs, etc., etc. But what I think the wealthy individual that flies into Vancouver International Airport, or as Abbotsford, they can rent a hotel room, call up the Starnet maitre d', if you will, tell them that they wanted to participate in a late-term abortion, whether they had training or not. Maybe that just turned their crank. And the Starnet maitre d' would go out and find a pimp, and the pimp would deliver a woman who maybe for $5,000, $10,000 or some drugs. She was pregnant. She wanted to get rid of her child. She'd come to the studio, and the individual and the woman would be recorded on film. And obviously then there's several victims. Well, there's the woman who's having the abortion, and she may be so desperate on drugs or whatever that she's barely conscious of what's going on. But then there's the individual who's participating in the abortion without training, and he or she is on film. That means the individual who has custody of those films has custody of that individual for the rest of their lives. And maybe they go on for a career in government, provincial, state, federal, or whatever, or maybe they're visitors from outside the country. But at the end of the day, I would predict that Starnet had 1 million black veil victims around the world at very high levels in 60 countries, which makes it perhaps one of the world's premier criminal enterprises. So on that raid, there was 100 persons, law enforcement officers raided Starnet Communications on the 20th of August 1999, and the director or officer in charge said it was like Star Wars in there. It was 3 floors of high-tech material. I believe he quoted about 80 computers, all the files, and of course, all of the images of child abuse. And as we know, Vancouver is a center for the development of artificial intelligence for tracking faces, hotel rooms, and suspects in the international pedophile tracking racket. And of course, provided you are genuinely intending to shut down pedophilia, that may be a very good cause. But what happens if you're fishing and looking in different countries for suspects who may or may not have done anything, abused a child, but they have been processed through artificial intelligence, which we can come to, so that they become a suspect, and then they become vulnerable to blackmail.
When you say processed through artificial intelligence, David, what do you mean?
Yes, in which I'm, let me just say again, and I think it's worth reminding people how I've rebadged myself. I consider myself now to be a public expert artificial intelligence witness, because I had 40 years in artificial intelligence and developed my own system with very particular characteristics which make it unique even today, and appearing in the court of public opinion, which is a show like yours, Jason, where I believe now, and you're few and far between, but there are some very courageous talk show hosts who appear to be invulnerable or resistant to social engineering. And you've got social engineers snapping at your heels all the time.
Right now, as we speak, David. I'm getting emails from one of our least
Right,
favorite social
right.
engineers. He's very concerned with what you're doing.
And let me just riff off on that. You drag me back if you think I'm getting off target. But you see, we've talked about the Dobert rules, right? And actually the family, the Dobert family, they pronounce that Daubert, right?
Right.
Being a bit of a Frenchie, I would say Daubert, but I'm happy to go along with whatever is acceptable, well, I guess to the family and, you know, the people who understand what I'm talking about. Now, under the Dobert rules, there was a case of the family or an individual in the Dobert family against Merck Pharmaceuticals in 1993, where the expert witness that was brought by the Dobert family had done experimentation with the particular drug in question on animals. And the defense of the Merck Pharmaceuticals expert witness was that that did not translate with normal credibility from a scientific point of view from animals to human beings.
Was
So
it
the Dobert
Merck
defense
or
or the
Merrill
Dobert
Dow
rule,
Pharmaceuticals, David?
I thought it was Merck, MERCK, isn't that a pharmaceutical outfit?
It is. I'm looking for it, but I don't see that case. I see Merrill.
Well,
I see
anyway,
Daubert
whatever, that
versus
was
Merrill Dow.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I stand corrected. What's interesting is starting from 1993, which of course was the year they tried to blow up the World Trade Center, first time, that was Ramzi Youssef, who was put in jail by Phil McConnell's sister, but I mustn't digress. I think Youssef said, give me more money and I'll bring them down next time.
Yeah.
Oh, that's in 19, yes, okay, I'm sorry, I got a little waylaid there.
Maybe this is
So now,
wrong. In 1923.
What happened? Yeah, what happened is now, I think they started introducing artificial intelligence algorithms or expert systems rules to make sure that a plaintiff or a prosecutor's expert witness would be excluded from the court to protect the assets, if you will, of the powerful defendants associated with, for example, the shareholders in Serco. So I think what we're seeing is that people like you and people like me were being picked up through social engineering networks as potential threats who might one day appear in court as an expert witness, you because of your background in, well, cinema and Hollywood, who might have some very useful things to say about what Dr. Thomas Barnett described when they captured images of the people jumping out of the North Tower as the first live broadcast mass snuff film in human history. You already exhibited your talents there, Jason. You remember we were looking at the image across the London Bridge where the man who would ultimately be shot by the police was alleged to have moved. Now, he was on an ankle bracelet, which is kind of interesting. So if you're tracking a prisoner or an ex-prisoner through a snuff film, that might be very interesting to the people who are producing snuff and putting it out on the internet. So what I think is happening is they're applying, and this comes to the kind of people who snap at your heels and the kind of people who snap at my heels, they're receiving scripts that are partly written through artificial intelligence algorithms, and they're told to do this to you or this to me. So, I don't know, they write me a letter saying, here's a link to someone that'll help you solve the John Benet Ramsey murder. And I think they're sending me an image that would take me to a child porn site and entrap me. So I called the police, and that's by the by. But the intriguing thing, I think, with this is it's not so much the incident itself, like what created the hole in building number 6, which is the customs service building. It's what stopped expert witnesses coming into court and explaining that you can't possibly generate a plausible conspiracy or explanation for 911, that there's a guy in a cave in Afghanistan, with extraordinarily untalented pilots who are going to fly in a building on 911 and blow a hole in building number 6. Sorry.
Yeah.
So what we've got here,
so let me take you back a second, David, because there's a couple of things that I think we haven't really told everybody. First thing, actually, and I'm This is my bad. We should remind everyone, David, that we're a little early today, starting at 10 a.m., but we're doing that because we want to accommodate another international guest. We've got Ole Dammegard joining us in 45 minutes on David Hawkins Discovery CSI, which I think most people know, David, you and I are doing every Friday on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. And today we're going to have it also simulcast on patreon.com/lightonconspiracies, because Ole is going to join us. And in the second part of the program, we're going to be talking about the London Bridge attack from last week, the Fishmonger's Hall. I'm excited for this show, David, because it's going to bring together years of research that you've done into the City and Guilds system there in London, as well as Ole's tracking of Masonic symbology and these sort of terror attacks, which you have done a great job of showing evidence that links these sort of simulations to the Serco resilience training. Now, Ole has identified all this stuff separately. He's not nearly as aware of Serco as you are, so I think it's going to be an interesting opportunity to share ideas and really bring that research together. But of course, during this segment of the program, where we still have plenty of time left, you're going to be telling us about what, to you, as an explosives expert, is undeniably an explosion rather than a collapse of Building 6. A lot of people are surprised to hear about Building 7 collapsing, but before yesterday, I never heard about an explosive hole in Building 6. I haven't heard anything about Building 6.
Well, there's quite a lot of information about Building 6 because, and we're of course going to come back to the link to the raid on Starnet Communications, because all that kit that was taken, maybe 80 computers, servers, images, files, images of child abuse, right? Images of the people who abused them in the studios at Starnet, quite possibly live footage from what went on at the pig farm or at the Burns Road site where Piggy Palace used to have 1,700 raves and apparently occasionally have cannibal feasts, because inside the fridge there was, for example, a skull split down the middle with a hand and a foot in it. So there were sordid, disgusting, disgraceful things going on in the city of Vancouver, in the province of British Columbia, in the country of Canada, which the governments at those different levels either ignored or were too terrified to stop. Now, when all of that kit was taken, that represented the platform on which an elite criminal enterprise engaged in hardcore adult and child pornography in over 60 countries, and online gaming, which I think translates into Deadpool betting. So, for example, going back to the hypothesis that there's a pregnant woman on the table inside the studio and she's undergoing a late-term abortion without anesthetic, and they've got a monitor of the pulse of the fetus, which is beating, of course, heart is beating, or its heart is beating, and the pulse of the mother. So these vermin, I believe, could be transmitting live digital signals into 4-star and 5-star hotels of this network, could actually bet on the time of death or the difference in the time of death between the baby or the fetus and the mother.
But
now,
David,
people think I'm being alarmist.
Let me just stop you a second. How do you arrive at that hypothesis? I mean, we've heard testimony that there were studios there. You and I spoke to that security officer who was standing outside 425 Carroll Street. I guess this was, so this was the video here where I came to visit you in Vancouver, and we walked over to 425 Carroll Street. We spoke to that security guard who looked younger than me, and he was not working there in 1999, but he knew the rumors of the building, and he said that there was a porno studio and they had rooms and things like that. How did we arrive at the late-term abortion part of it? I understood that it would be just, you know, pornographic sex films that they're making.
No, very specifically in that Bikers article and multiple other articles, it was a reference to hardcore adult and child pornography. So I'm speculating. I speculate in my mind what would represent hardcore pornography with a child. Well, it could conceivably go all the way up to killing the child. right?
I guess,
So I'm not saying that I can
there's
prove it. All I'm
no
saying is,
tried and true definition of hardcore porn. It's sort of a vague
well,
description.
other than it's not softcore porn, right?
Right.
Right. So hardcore means, quite possibly torture. The kind maybe with the Shermans hanging on that interior railing inside inside the
It
house.
does say
But anyway, I digress.
all manner of hardcore pornography. That does seem
Right.
like quite a. Well, look at this. The company's websites include Sizzle, Chisel, and Redlight.com. I don't know that I've actually read this article as carefully as I should. The company enlisted sports celebrities, including Larry Holmes, to endorse its gambling sites. Wow.
Well, that's right. Now, remember the aggressive inference of guilt associated with spoliation. When they take away evidence, right, that never appeared in court, there were no prosecutions, we are entitled to an aggressive inference of guilt, right? So I'm alleging my aggressive inference is that on those films and material that they took away, there was what I described and speculate. I can't prove it, but I'm entitled to infer it because they've taken the evidence away. It's a bit like the hole in the building of the Customs Service building in New York. Because they've blown the building up, all of the evidence of what was in it before has been destroyed, with the exception of the gold in the basement, in the vault.
Right.
Where they found an armored personnel carrier in one of the tunnels leading to the vault, right, with a ton or so of gold in it. So this is where I make the connection. When those 100 law enforcement people raided the premises of Starnet, included amongst them was the high-tech unit from Ottawa that was looking at the computers, the Vancouver police, the RCMP, and 2 SWAT teams from the United States, IRS and Customs Service. So we have a choice. Again, because everything has been taken away, I can infer which of those organizations most likely took custody of that stuff, right? And I've decided that the most likely, because that's a lot of material that needs to be hidden somewhere, and it needs to be hidden in a place like in plain view. I think they took that equipment to the Customs Service building in New York, building number 6, and opened up a new operation in the custody of Customs, right?
Well, let me address
expanded
that, because, see, I like this line of hypothetical analysis because it makes a lot of sense. We know that U.S. Customs, from reports, was involved in this raid at Starnet Communications, and it makes sense. That is what U.S. Customs does, is they raid people who are dealing in contraband or attempting to bring contraband into the United States. And it also makes sense that if you're doing something over the internet in Canada that puts something into the United States, that the U.S. Customs Service could be involved. Canada strikes me as certainly one of the countries that cooperative operations would be happening with. It is an American-owned company that was operating in Vancouver, so U.S. Customs having some kind of jurisdiction over its executives. I don't know enough about the law to say, but it makes sense. And certainly when Customs takes this contraband, they put it in an evidence locker. We've also separately heard firsthand testimony from John Carmen, who was a U.S. Customs and Border Patrol agent, that he discovered child pornography in possession of his superiors that was not properly processed through the system. And when he reported it, he was drummed out of there. So what you're saying, David, corresponds to a lot of evidence that we've seen in the public domain.
Well, absolutely. And then there's something else that might have come into that building, which is the special formulation explosives or incendiaries needed to bring the towers down. Now, I'm a relative explosive expert. I'm not a big exploder. I used them. I taught how the safe handling, et cetera, in the oil industry. But if someone had tasked me with bringing the towers down after Ramzi Youssef failed, Ramzi Youssef being, as I understand it, at ADX Florence, courtesy of Christine Marcy, Field McConnell's sister, who was senior counsel for the detention and deportation program of the Immigration and Naturalization Service around that time. On his left, I'm being hypothetical here, he's got Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and on his right, he's got Timothy McVeigh, the Murrah Building bomber, who got executed, possibly courtesy of Christine Marcy, in 2001. So you've got a university of bombers at ADX Florence. If you can find a network that allows them to communicate a planning for 911, and if you had the money to actually put the stuff together, well, again, fascinatingly enough, the money needed to, store some gold, collect some protection racket from organized crime in New York, would very likely be with the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, which was managed by Christine Marcy and Eric, what's Holder. The name of the former Attorney General? Sorry?
Eric Holder.
Yeah, Eric Holder. I believe in the early days of the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, it was around 1984, 1985, that fund was under the control of Christine Marcy and Eric Holder, and they used it, or I believe they stole from it, to buy a Boeing 727 for the Federal Marshal's prisoner transportation system, which of course is extraordinarily effective when you think that you might be able to bring in some special forces from within the prison system into New York to place, for example, as elevator mechanics in the Twin Towers, ready to use the special incendiaries that had been stored down in the bowels of the World Trade Center number 6 building, the Customs House building, prior to demolition of Towers 1, Tower 2, and Tower 7. But now what you've got, quite possibly in building number 6, is all of the evidence that the Starnet international hardcore adult and child pornography and online gaming had been operating out of that building, and the building had been used to store the Special Operation Forces demolition kit that was actually built to bring the towers down after Ramzi Youssef failed to bring them both down in 1993. So it seems to me now, thinking on the fly, which we're entitled to do because they've taken away all the evidence, that actually building number 6, the United States Customs Service building, was most probably the command center for the 911 attack in New York.
Look at
now,
that,
there's some
David.
other technologies that I think are very relevant. I'm sorry?
This is building 6 World Trade Center. I haven't seen images of this before. It's quite interesting. Now that looks like World Trade Center 1.
It's a bomb.
2.
You know what that facade looks like? A bit like the Fishmonger's Hall. But anyway, I digress.
Here's another image from that Raytheon imaging thing. We haven't seen that before. Look at the depth of that hole. Is that 6 right there?
Yes.
That's remarkably different than the rest of the area, isn't it?
Yes, because the others were brought down by incendiaries, which raised the temperature of the internal columns past the melting point of steel, which is 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit, to 5,600 degrees, which is double the melting temperature of steel and about half the temperature of the surface of the sun. And what they wanted to do there, I believe, was disguise the demolition with incendiaries so it wouldn't look like explosives. Now, what's absolutely critical for me is, when was that building blown up? Now, the logical time to build it, to blow it up in order to avoid attracting attention, remember it wouldn't be hit by a plane, would be either when Tower 2, the South Tower, comes down, or Tower 1 comes down, or building number 7 comes down, which was later that afternoon. But I think if you were running that as a command center from below the ground, you'd want to, because basically it's a bunker, if you will, it could continue to run as a command center even when Tower 1 or Tower 2 came down. But towards the end of the day, and I don't know exactly what they had in plan, you needed to destroy everything inside building number 6, because that's all of the evidence, if that was the command center, that this wasn't an attack by some clown in a cave in Afghanistan. It was an attack by the people who were using the Customs Service building in a criminal and treasonous attack on the United States of America. So the question is it possible that some of those US Customs Service raiders of Starnet, and for that matter of the IRS, were actually taking away information or images of child abuse that compromised them or their colleagues. That is to say, had Starnet and its handlers, and for a variety of reasons I'll come to who I think the mentors of Starnet were, could Starnet have penetrated key arms of the American government with pedophile entrapment and extortion and blackmail? And I think, unfortunately, including Canada, that image you've got there, the answer is a resounding yes. Over to you.
Well, I wanted to go back to this guy, Cameron Ortis, because there seemed to be a lot of similarities between what was going on at Starnet Communications in 1999 and what we've been hearing about from Jeffrey Epstein. They're both involved in child pornography, recording videos, entrapment operations, etc. There seems to be a cover-up going on in the United States in terms of, we heard Alexander Acosta say that he was told to go easy on Epstein because Epstein was intelligence. Now, this guy, Cameron Ortis, who was a high-level RCMP officer, is now alleged to be a spy. So we've certainly heard that Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were spies, very probably for Israel, for MI6. Obviously, the United States intelligence agencies are read into the program if they're telling Alexander Acosta to lay off him. David, I've come to believe that the Five Eyes, the Nine Eyes, the 14 Eyes, these clandestine security services, whether it's CSIS or the CIA or the DIA or MI6 or, all of these organizations seem to be aligned in a way with one another that appears to defy their, what we believe their goal is, which is to protect us. It seems much more like an organization designed to protect themselves and the wealthy elites that are funding this thing or whatever. But it seems like this guy could have been involved with the Canadian end of this operation, and perhaps Epstein and Maxwell were brought in there after this got shut down to sort of take it over and have it go mobile. For people who maybe haven't seen our reporting on Cameron Ortis, why don't you tell us what happened with him?
Well, he was being arrested, then he was released on bail. He had to stay at his parents' home, and then he's back in jail now. And when they went to his home, amazingly enough, they found 25 computers, right? This is the Director General of Intelligence for the RCMP. And the computers have been programmed, so when you look inside, it's beyond me, it's above my pay grade, they destroy their own data. So it's very suspect, very, very weird, you see. And of course, that's a lot of computers to have at your home, particularly when you're the Director General of Intelligence for the RCMP. But I think now, because so often, just like you said, and I'm not reproaching you, you can talk about FBI, CIA, and they've got all this various interest. There has to be some way of pulling them all together in a coordinated fashion to execute crimes on the scale that we see at Ground Zero on 911. So I want to just lunge into the technology and the little troll or trail through the patent office, Jason.
Before you go there, David, I just want to ask you a couple of questions. Because we see that this guy, Cameron Ortis, is returning to Ottawa. You spoke about the high-tech squad from Ottawa. Is that is this like the cyber crimes unit of the Canadian whatever, is Ottawa?
Yes, yes. I mean, that's where, because it's sort of transnational and around the world, and of course, a target for that would be or should be is the elite international criminal network of Starnet,
right,
which supported hardcore adult and child pornography and online gaming in over 60 countries.
And that's what I was going to ask you.
Is an incredible. Sorry?
But that's what I was going to ask you. Is like, obviously, if we've got this billion-dollar criminal organization, and they're like, ooh, we got nailed in 1999 by this high-tech Ottawa squad, I think they'd be pretty persistently focused on infiltrating the high-tech law enforcement squad and putting somebody in there. I noticed that Cameron Ortis is 47 years old, which seems to be the same exact age as Justin Trudeau and his friend Charles Ingvoldson, or whatever that guy's name is.
Christopher Charles Invaldsson, was charged, arrested, and jailed uh, with directing an international pedophile ring, and he was the roommate of Justin Trudeau. Now, am I accusing Justin Trudeau of anything? Not particularly, except, you got to choose your trends carefully. And what did you know and when did you know it about your buddy, that he wanted to make a Liberal member of Parliament? But again, just to come back, we need to understand that there has to be a highly sophisticated handler that is able to pull in units, when I'm thinking of a stage play, that have a particular focus, like information technology, like what did they look for and what did they take away from Starnet, which is very different from environmental cleaners that might go into building number 6 in New York and make sure that there's no evidence of what they were doing before the building was blown up. So what's characteristic of these meta crimes, if you will, is the incredible precision or synchronicity where you bring in one team to blow up a building and then you bring in another building, another team to take the evidence away and send the steel to smelters in China and India, and then they smelt it back to steel ingots, I suppose, and they bring it back into the United States. The ultimate irony, so that I believe the United States Navy has built a frigate out of the steel taken from the World Trade Center. So Americans are being gamed. I mean, I'm not saying you're naive, because I mean the Canadians are even worse, and the Brits are even just as bad. So the average citizen, this is so far out of their understanding. It reminds me of Edgar Hoover's comment, wasn't it, that the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. So we need to find the organization that has something resembling the mens rea, right? And I've said before, if you string artificial intelligence algorithms and patterns together to create an effect like blowing up the buildings, it's very hard to find the mens rea. But I believe over the last 8 days, Jason, you and I have got to find an organization that has some elements of a mens rea, in that it can put together the scripts for the attack before the attack occurs. And I'm talking about the BBC World Service.
Oh, yes.
Now, the BBC
David,
World
sorry,
Service...
real quick.
I'm sorry?
I found an image of that. Ooh, they named it the USS New York. Wow. So they built this warship.
Now, I mean, surely they're laughing at you guys, aren't they?
That's bad.
Right, that is to say, we brought those buildings down, killed 3,000 citizens, 343 firefighters, 60 New York Port Authority and New York Jersey police, right? We took the steel, probably AMEC arranged the shipping, who's in the offices above Starnet. We send it to China and India. China's okay, India's okay, but China is not exactly a friend, even to John Shalikashvili, in his 1997 visit. We melt it down, we bring the steel back, and we create a frigate, USS New York. I mean, come on, America, wake up.
Wow. Shortly after September 11th, 2001, Governor Pataki wrote a letter to Secretary of the Navy Gordon England requesting that the Navy bestow the name New York on a surface warship involved in the global war on terrorism in honor of the victims of the September 11th attack. Now, okay, symbolic amount of steel salvaged from the World Trade Center after it was destroyed was used in her construction. A symbolic amount. What does that mean?
What is the symbol? Basically, America, you're a helpless sleeping giant. We'll bring your buildings down. We'll take the steel. We'll flog it to the Chinese and the Indians. We'll bring it back. We'll put it in a USS frigate. I mean,
wow.
I don't know. Sometimes
David, we're getting very close to the time where we need to transition over to Patreon. And I definitely want people who aren't yet sponsors to make their way over to patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. I'm getting a little tongue-tied there, David. And today, our special presentation is going to also be simulcast on patreon.com/lightonconspiracies, because we're going to be joined by Ole Dammegard. And this is, I think, only the second time that you and Ole have participated in a show together, so it's going to be really awesome to bring together all of your research into the city and guilds of London and all the ghost hotels that you've spoken about, the way these types of resilience tests seem to match a pattern, and also to talk with Ole about how he has observed that. So I hope that people will join us. They've got 20 minutes now to make their way over to patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. So David, in just 5 minutes, if we can wrap up what you were about to say before we transition to our next show, this is a topic I think we're going to have to cover again in future episodes.
Yes, absolutely. So now I want to talk about the injection of fake news and media plays into events such as 911 or the 7/7 or the disappearance of MH370. I believe now that what the BBC World Service is doing is using that patented apparatus, that voice text apparatus for generating TV signals, so that they can prompt a newsreader like Jane Stanley with a text and isolate from Jane Stanley what I call the digital blocking notes, which are instructions to other units of actors, for example, to blow up the building. So if they get separated because the director is careless or the digital annotation of the script has been mistaken, then what could happen, of course, is that you send an instruction to Jane Stanley to read the text that the Salomon Brothers building has collapsed, but you get it out of kilter with the digital blocking notes that go to the demolition crew to blow the building up, which might be 7 and 6. Now, what intrigues me at the moment, and I've got to explore that a little more, wouldn't it be interesting if they left the bombing, the detonation of a bomb inside building number 6, the customs service building, until the collapse of building number 7, and use the building 7 collapse to distract people from the fact that there was a bomb in building number 6 destroying evidence of a hardcore adult and child pornography network, the theft of the gold, and the storage of the devices that were brought down the Twin Towers. You know, it'd be a classic magical trick. It reminds me of your VR Phantasma stuff. You know, basically you decoy someone's attention over there while you commit your major crime over here. So it may be that the major crime of 911 was the bomb inside the customs service building in New York, because that's where the planning and execution of the 911 attack was executed, down in the bunkers. Over to you.
You know, that image we saw earlier, David, it's remarkably similar to images I've seen of the Murrah building exploding. I think I might have already moved off of it, but let's see, I just brought that up by saying I think 9/11 WTC 6. It just looked so much like that. I mean, here, this image right here. This looks very much like images we've seen of the Murrah building, which had a bomb inside it. I don't know anything about explosives except that they go boom, but that looks a lot like what we were looking at, and that's building 6.
And just to remind Americans of how, if I may, they placed a bomb under the child care center in that building. These people, they've got to be brought to justice. They're manipulating the court system. So, and this comes back to my role, I believe I can serve as a public expert witness and help ordinary people understand what's coming together against a backdrop of artificial intelligence algorithms that are sending signals to blow up the building. Over to you.
Yeah, well, we're just about ready, David, to transition over to our sponsor exclusive show on patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth, and a special presentation today for sponsors of patreon.com/light on conspiracies. We're going to be joined by Ole Dammegard in just 15 minutes, and we're going to shift gears to discuss the attack last week on London Bridge. I know Ole has created a PowerPoint presentation. He's brought together a number of the anomalies that he has observed, which includes the planning of, a wide range of what Ole believes are resilience tests, terror events, these sort of staged practice events that always seem to coincide with stabbings and even 9/11. You know, it speaks to your references to the switching from friend or foe and from training to live fire. So it's going to be a very interesting show for people to see just 15 minutes from now. And for anyone who's been watching us right now, David, on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth or subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth, I always like to encourage them to go and visit your Patreon page at patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards, and it's really important that people sponsor the co-hosts on Crowdsource the Truth, because I couldn't do these shows without my illustrious co-hosts. David also has a free website that people can visit, and that is at reversecciscripts.com. It's a beautifully designed website that has got a lot of information about David. You can access the playlist that contains the YouTube videos that David and I have done together. So there's quite a lot of information there. You can also reach out to David on Twitter. If you're not yet following David on Twitter, please go visit him there at CSI Hawkins. He's tweeting frequently. You can get right to the website from there. Send him some birthday wishes when August rolls around. And it's a good way to keep in touch with David. You can direct message him on Twitter, and it's a wonderful way to spread this information around. David, we'll be back in just a few minutes on Patreon. Anything you want to say before we close it out here?
Well, no, just I want to serve as a public expert witness, and I think I'm uniquely qualified to do it with this peculiar method of keeping expert witnesses from plaintiffs out of the court.
Yes, the Daubert standard for expert witnesses, something we're going to be looking at much more closely as time goes on. So David, thank you for joining me. I look forward to our conversation with Ole in just a few minutes. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you on Patreon and Subscribestar.
Thank you, Jason.